I'll just record that way. I don't have to worry about it if we actually do this, because there are a couple other people that are want to get involved and sometimes store and forward technology works best. And then for part of our discussion, we'll stop the recording. But while I'm doing that orientation, the context that I just started was about TEXGHS. Who is TEXGHS? What is TEXGHS? What is TEXGHS? And then what is the Mental Health SIG? SIG stands for Special Interest Group. TEXGHS is an incubator that I started here in Austin, Texas years ago. Actually, the first activities were in 2003. It wasn't called TEXGHS until 2008. We started Austin's first co-working space, as well as Austin's first privately funded incubator. I'm the founder of both. On the incubator, that's really where my passion is, about how do we help early stage companies get off the ground. I started the TEXGHS focused on what we call impact innovation companies, companies that have technologies that solve some type of human need. And we've worked with literally thousands of entrepreneurs around the world. The last official count, more than 6,500 entrepreneurs from 42 countries, in 25 different countries. And to demonstrate what's happening, I will be in Hungary on Sunday. And since Hungary actually has some quite interesting work that's been done on trauma and flow and all sorts of other stuff, it ends up giving us a bigger solution set for the conversation we're about to have. The main thing is to say we started in Austin, but really the idea is to drive for impact innovation solutions worldwide. The TEXGHS, that stands for Texas Global Health Security and Innovation. The initiative was started by University of Texas at Austin, Texas State University, several different universities, as well as TEXGHS is one of the founding members of the initiative. This was directly in response to the global health security issue that we had with COVID, as you might imagine. TEXGHS got involved because there's a group that's also a founding member of the Mental Health SIG, or not the Mental Health SIG, but TEXGHS, that's called the Pandemic Tech Accelerator. The Pandemic Tech Accelerator is based in Austin, but has been working on pandemics before pandemics were cool. And specifically, the thing that happened is Dr. Andrew Nerlinger, who's a friend of mine, started this organization. I know somewhere before 2017, TEXGHS wasn't involved with it till 2017. But we did a project with them in 2018, as an example, focused on infectious diseases in Nigeria, helping 10 startups get off the ground that were infectious disease startups, or pandemic type of startups, but different infectious diseases. The reason they engaged us to create the reason Pandemic Tech Accelerator engaged us is we really know how the tools, the techniques to get entrepreneurial ventures off the ground. We have 4 verbs that we use, and since I'm still talking about TEXGHS just a little bit, I'll mention those 4 verbs. Discover talent. We discover talent. We develop talent. We connect talent to opportunity and we help it scale. So discovering, finding these amazing solutions around the world, and then helping them develop to a certain level, connecting them to the opportunities. Sometimes that's due to the US market. Like my activities in Hungary this next week are going to be focused on the US market, or US market entry. But with a Pandemic Tech Accelerator, one of my favorite examples, just to show you the power of the network, which is probably the most important thing I can point to, we have entrepreneurs and scientists out of South Australia taking on the disease through our network in the Pandemic Tech Accelerator network in Ethiopia, specifically a disease called leishmaniasis. And so one of the reasons that my personal career in travel has taken me to 25 countries over the last 5 years, and with a year and a half of sitting at home, is specifically doing that. Because the premise is this: when I started TEXGHS, this is kind of the big audacious goal, but blah blah blah. I'll tell you, I'll be audacious. Well, I say it this way because some people have heard this quote before. William Gibson, the science fiction author, said, "The future's already here. It's not widely distributed yet." The Kevin Coyne corollary to that is all the world's problems have already been solved. It's just a matter of connecting the entrepreneur with the solution into the market with a problem. And I have about 30 examples that I can give off the cuff. My favorite, especially in the context of talking about TEXGHS, which is this consortium across all these different organizations, is the example I gave earlier about leishmaniasis, taking on leishmaniasis. Now, all that being said, let me go ahead and do this. I will go ahead and present, and I'll hop in and talk a little bit more specifically about the Mental Health SIG. So Texas Global Health Security Innovation Consortium is this group that has, like I mentioned, Pandemic Tech Accelerator, University of Texas at Austin, Texas State University, several other universities. I don't know all of them, but I know that we've collaborated with a number of them, especially UT, and our colleagues at the Austin Technology Incubator. Can give you more details about that, but a lot of the conversations, you mentioned this is last year, we're in a steering committee meeting where I'm one of the members, and we're talking about what the initiative needs to be and stuff like that. And there's a lot of concern about the virus, viral therapeutics, all these different type of things. And, you know, all this really important stuff. And I know a tiny bit about that. Although I grew up in the ranks of the information technology entrepreneurs, I know a little bit about that because I worked at the University Health Science Center in San Antonio in a infectious disease lab right at the very beginning of my career as a lowly lab tech. So they're talking about all these different things around dealing with the virus. But what I hadn't seen happen was anyone really take on the mental health crisis that was happening. During the last couple of years that we've been going through all this stuff together, I have lost an aunt to the virus, but I've lost two 40-year-olds friends to the end of their life without any other signs of why they're gone. I mean, likely suicide, but we don't know for sure. And I decided to say, hey, all of you doctors and PhDs and all that sort of stuff, I'm this entrepreneur that says that's always had this mental health interest, and I'll tell you why in a second. And I said, I think we need to start an initiative with around mental health and have a special interest group. That's why it's called a SIG, a special interest group around that. And the purpose of this is to make sure that that we deal with the more pressing issue. At least I think that there's been, I don't know what the death rate is, but I know from my own personal things, like if these two 40-year-old guys who didn't know each other are no longer here and they're at the end of their life alone with no other signs of why they would be at the end of their life, something's really happening that's not been spoken about. And, you know, I've now subsequently read that the numbers are up on suicides, depression, all that sort of stuff. Andy and I talked a little bit about that as well. And I just was like, okay, we've got to do something about that. And so that's where the Texas Mental Health SIG was started, with support of the director of the TEXGHS, Lisa McDonald. She's the executive director of the overall thing. And then I've been driving this. Now, in my personal case, the reason that I'm so concerned about mental health, even though I'm not a mental health professional, I'm a technology entrepreneur that built an incubator that's focused on impact innovation, technology that solves human need. But how is it I got into this this fight or whatever the right metaphor is? Maybe not fight, but why am I concerned about this? I grew up with a dad that had mental illness and had to be institutionalized. And he was, during a good portion of my earlier years. And so as a startup guy, I have always been concerned about technologies that not only, solve health issues, but solve mental health or mental illness issues. And at some point, I'll be publishing more of a personal sketch about this. I've actually done more than 27 different step off the ledge of the world's kind of, experiments to try to take care of my own mental health and mental illness. I've never had the issues that my father's had, but obviously I've got half his genes and some signs of some of the similar type of things. And so make a long story short, I've probably been paying attention more than anyone I've met thus far on the planet. And I've traveled pretty far. I have not met anyone else that's more focused on mental health startups than me. Now, it always has been a Tech Ranch, the founder's pet project, because we have stuff in regular healthcare and we have stuff around electric vehicles and robotic agriculture and, all sorts of stuff like that you'd expect to have from an Austin-based technology incubator. But on the mental health thing, as I'm in Latvia for one of my trips and I meet a mental health startup guy from Poland, I immediately, put them into the little bag and take care of these guys. But truth is, the venture community historically has ignored these, right? It's only till 2020 that they're like, hey, wait, we got to do something here, right? And we have seen a blip in investments and stuff like that, but they really hadn't, they were ignored. In fact, ignored is probably not a strong enough word. There's almost like a negative bias, and there's still a negative bias in the market of the investment community. It's just not as bad as it was because people are realizing, depression rates are up 4x and stuff like that. All right, all that is, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Just based on the bias, right? So prior to the Institute, I worked for Methodist Healthcare Ministries, which was a quasi hospital conversion foundation. We actually co-own the Methodist system with HCA. So my question is, with that in mind, is the bias less about stigma and more about the fact that in the health systems arenas, it is not traditionally a moneymaker? I mean, and that sounds so crass, right? But I'm asking from the perspective of, we pushed our own hospital system to get engaged, and HCA being HCA was never enough for a bottom line. And so I'm just, and then I think about, if you think about, kind of the innovation, you have to have places, right, where the innovation is utilized, and most often it's hospital systems. And so I'm just curious if it's stigma equally to the fact that there's not a bottom line or a return.
I actually think that the stigma is driving both, right? Okay. I think it is driving both. I can't tell you that I've run, like I don't have direct customers myself on the like on the healthcare side myself. Obviously, I've been in the conversation a lot, both as a consumer of services, and when I say consumer of services, the stuff that I was going to talk about is like, quite literally, I have 27 different things that I've done. Some of them that would be considered very traditional, and some of them that would be considered very, very untraditional. And we can talk about that at some point. At some point, I'll be publishing about that. I'm just getting my guts together to actually do that. Because one of the things what's happened that builds on the answer to your question, there's a gentleman by the name of Steve Blank, who's a professor at Stanford. I'm going to misquote his actual numbers, but entrepreneurs by and large, there's some studies that say around 30%, some that say more than 60% of entrepreneurs in the United States have some underlying issue, perhaps mental illness or mental health issue. And I don't know that the numbers have been directly studied. Stephen Blank is one of the few people I've even seen speak about it. But a lot of times that, the reason guys like me, who are a little bit more untraditional, become that way, like as an example, without going into too much of a biographical sketch, I've always been seen as a maverick, as an example, and a lot of entrepreneurs are seen as mavericks, and there's a reason that they didn't necessarily know how to play well in another environment.
Yeah.
That's the positive side. The downside is if we look at the kind of the Hollywoodization of startups, we take the American male culture and then we take it to a toxic level in seeing that this idea that you're not supposed to show the world that you bleed, right? I imagine on the average magazine that we might see about, Bill Gates or Michael Dell or Steve Jobs and all that sort of stuff. One tough man, and forget about everyone else. And I am saying man versus women, right? Because this is the problem with part of what happens in entrepreneurship. this one person hacked, the solution out of bare wood, but with his own hands, blah, 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 blah. It's a false narrative. It's actually a false narrative. And the good news is that there's a lot of stuff, guys like me, and part of the work that we do with our entrepreneurs is try to attack that false narrative. And part of the value that I can actually offer on, we started calling ourselves an entrepreneur development organization, because I think that the most valuable thing that we know is how to build the entrepreneur. Whereas a lot of people are like, well, let me talk to you about investment or something like that. Or, let me talk to you about how your cap table should look. A lot of the knowledge without any of the embodiments of, and so my concern area that I have expertise in is more on that. On the mental health side, I had not really looked at it until COVID about, other than, I hadn't looked at the market other than when I found a mental health entrepreneur like this Polish guy that I met in Riga, Latvia, in 2019, who had a hellacious story about why he had to start this company. Like, okay, I paid attention to him, but we didn't look at it from a, we don't have like major institutions that, I can knock on their door and say, hey, blah, blah, blah. I think also their perception is that there's a lot of softer science involved in it as well. And a misunderstanding about that. I think also there's a negative bias in the culture that we don't recognize that the culture itself is producing some of the problems, right? One of our members, a woman by the name of Honor Chan, I was actually talking about or we've even had recent programs. We run a weekly program that we actually talked about the negative bias that Facebook, as an example, produces. It is producing negative outcomes that are creating even worse mental health outcomes and even driving mental illness, right? And so I know more about that. And I think, but back to the core of your question, the thing that I think is hardest about it is, especially the entrepreneurs are taught that you're not supposed to show the world that you bleed.
Is that what you want to share your book? Or is that what you want to write?
Yeah, well, I think in some ways, so I've done Japanese martial arts for 30 years. Right? I've done Japanese martial arts here. I'll pull this off the slides for a second. I've done Japanese martial arts for 30 years. And, Aikido for the last 23 or so. In the, I've got scars, this is a surgery scar, and there's multiple surgeries I've had to have because of that. So, I like to think I'm a tough guy, but the truth is that, everyone has problems or all that sort of stuff. And so figuring out, part of the idea about why I think I should do that more openly is I think that by both doing that myself personally, I can actually help other people be okay with the process. And we've seen that happen with other entrepreneurship stuff. I think it's one of the reasons that a lot of times when there are a lot of very transactional incubators and accelerators in cute. There are a lot of really transactional, very transactional focused incubators in town, or not just in town, but across the United States. They're very transactional. They're just about, hey, let's drive the result. But the other side is we're very relational. And part of what we recognize is the missing element of community in the entrepreneurship conversation. Because really, there's truly not a lot of government support for entrepreneurs in this country. There is no safety net. If you fail, you fail. And, you lose your healthcare, you lose your bank, you go bankrupt, all the different things. So part of what we're trying to do is build that. That's more of my come from about and the solution set that I think that we know something about, which we've been doing for years. First, actually in the context of Austin's history, I started an entrepreneur group here in '97, and I started another one in 2002. So I've been doing this entrepreneurial community support kind of stuff for a very long time, mainly because I joke about it, but there's some truth to it. I'm like, hey, I need a therapy group and it's got to have entrepreneurs in it, because most employees, or most of my friends that one of my best friends from college is still at IBM, and he just doesn't understand the fears you have when you're an entrepreneur versus. So that's where there's a lot of expertise that I and my team can offer from that standpoint. That gets us to the conversation about mental health, right? It like gets us to the conversation about mental health. And I think part of what I started talking to Andy about when I was really reaching for a brass ring was to say, I don't want to just think about an accelerator for mental health startups. I want to figure out how, together with what y'all are doing and what we're doing, creating a transformational force culturally. Now, the vanguard of that transformational force probably is going to look like an accelerator focused on mental health startups. And then let's come back a little bit. If we look over a trajectory of years and we say, okay, we saw a mental health accelerator that's doing this type of work with these startups. And then we look at, what transformationally might be happening longer term. Let's step back even more and say, okay, now, like to closer to where we're standing today and say, what's possible with the Texas GHS and the groups that we have and the entrepreneurs that we've been able to collect. We have an event that's going to be on March 15th, 2022. It's going to be part of South by Southwest. It's the Texas Global Health Security Initiative Innovation Week, essentially. There's going to be 4 days. The executive director has said, hey, we're thinking that the mental health day would be the 4th day, which is, they have 4 words. I'm going to forget what they are, but the 4th one is recover. How do we recover? And, people are not having, like, I didn't have COVID and I don't have to recover from COVID, but the economy is recovering. And the number one thing where the rubber meets the road, back to the type of things that you and I recognize, the biggest blocks to economic recovery right now are mental health issues. They're not supply chain issues. They're mental health issues. And we're seeing this in the Great Resignation. 40 million people in the United States alone are saying, I'm not going to go back to that. And because now the opportunity is, if we play the game right in the way that I'm pointing to, like transformational type of stuff out here, not just a mental health accelerator and not just an event on March 15th, 2022. If we really start thinking about what might be possible, then we start imagining that, we get this vanguard of entrepreneurs together. We support them in a way that they can't get in the existing market. We put them on showcase on March 15th with some other scientists, foundations, and different people together, right, on that day. We end up building some video assets that allow us to enable like interactions with those startups. And I'll go back to the deck so you get kind of the concept about how this ties into both the overall, the vision of the SIG, the special interest group, as well as the vision of the event that we would desperately like to get your support and interaction on. In muscle, it doesn't even have to be about money. It's like, although, I'll be like, hey, let's talk about that as well. but just so you know where we're looking. And I told this to Andy as well. I said, hey, there's all these different things we could do. We have some momentum. It's not as pretty as I want it to be. I used to work for Steve Jobs. I'm used to things being really shiny, and they're not. But there's some real promise of what's happened in the stuff that we've been doing. Let me hop into back. I'll go ahead and share a little bit more. And please, I like your questions. So even though, because I think you're pointing out stuff that I'm blind to. So I want to make sure you ask me questions about it. Okay. So the, vision, mission, purpose, accelerating healthy recovery is really the key idea about this. And to be as audacious to go for better mental health, not just mental illness and mental health, but better mental health than was present before we hit COVID. I actually think that we have a transformational opportunity. The mission, building a pipeline of mental health businesses to help address the unique challenges and the economic recovery. Purpose, to be a supportive venture support. And so the number one thing that I think is missing as I look at the market, and now this is me looking at it from an entrepreneur who leads entrepreneurs. So of course there's a bias in the original statement of this, and we're open to flexibility about what this looks like. But the purpose is to actually be one of the pipelines that really opens this up, and where it can be that transformational force, not just on enabling more mental health ventures, but also telling the cultural story at the same time. Areas of focus. There are 4 different areas of focus that we've identified. Supporting mental health ventures is the lead. Disaster recovery and resilient community tools. In many of the areas that we're working in fact, the woman that actually co-founded the SIG with me is in the Corpus Christi area. She's the director of an institute down there. And she said that was funded in response to one of the oil spills that happened, the Horizon oil spill, which really created a lot of mental health crisis there. And they're looking at how to build more resilient communities, not just because of the oil on the ground, but because of the loss. She was pointing out that right now, with regards to how heavy the pandemic has been, just putting out more mental health professionals is not going to scale fast enough for what's needed.
Right.
And so she brings the second point here about resilient community tools and about how we might do that. Third point, suicide prevention. In fact, one of the members of my committee, after she had gotten onto the committee, lost one of her nephews just a handful of weeks after this. Not only the 2 losses that I'm pointing to in my life, but it was very tragic. That it just leads me to believe, I mean, I haven't been doing, analysis on this other than it's like qualitatively, it's crazy the numbers that we directly know. So suicide prevention and supporting activities around that. And I think that part of the thing here to tie these back together is this is where, if we really start the cultural conversation that's led by these quote unquote heroes, the men and women that are leading mental health ventures, that then have stories about what they're doing, why are they doing this. I think the thing about it is that we can actually give some hope, and hope from a different plan, not just an 800 number, call this number in case of you're feeling suicidal. I appreciate those efforts, but because there's not stories around it, I don't think that we're seeing the impact that that has people make other choices than the choices that they might make in their darkest hours. And then the fourth one is coalesce the impact innovation. And this is where we really want to, and this might actually be, from what I perceive of the Institute, what you guys are doing a lot more of, not just the mental health crisis, but the economic impact of the mental health crisis. I found in my concern about impact issues around the world that if we don't put the human story also with a dollar sign next to it, people don't get it. People don't get it. And or at least some segment of the population doesn't get it. And, I've got a bunch of examples where outside of mental health, even we do a lot of work between Texas and Mexico as an example. And, sometimes there's certain segments of the population that have a certain political come from that they don't get it until you really frame it in that's saying, hey, this company that we're working with in Chihuahua knows how to predict and therefore stop heart attacks. And you should not give them such a hard time just because they're from Mexico. And that same way, the fourth point is to say, we need to start making this much more visible in a way that people can understand an economic impact. And that might be more driven by the academic kind of points on that.
So in your focus areas, just really quickly, where, and maybe I'm missing it, so point it out, please, and I apologize, but where in this, because I think you talk about transformation, and it isn't just about in terms of access and or availability, right? It's also about, it's the how we go about this. And so what about the lens for health disparities and inequities in this? And I say that in the sense that, you look at the percentages of increased suicide rate, and it's among, communities of color, right? And so for all the reasons that we could probably imagine, and then so I just think calling it out with some intentionality, because I think that's going to have to be part of the transformation.
Agreed. I totally agree. In fact, that's one of the reasons that I recruited Dr. Octavio Martinez to join. He's the executive director of the Hogg Foundation on Mental Health, which is part of the University of Texas. I've been a fanboy of their work for a long time. You know, being a Austinite, and I was always a lurker on their they do a lot of community based type of work. One of our entrepreneurs, long-term entrepreneurs at Tech Ranch, who is Hispanic, he's Mexican American specifically. He, when I brought up the issue, had already been working with Dr. Martinez as well, and was the introduction point. I've been watching the Hog Foundation for a long time, and so Dr. Martinez is on our committee. He's on the SIG committee. He doesn't get to participate in all the different meetings and stuff like that, just based on his schedule. But we're on a first name basis back and forth, and I certainly mean to have that frame on this. I realize that maybe some of my words don't support that or show that. And sometimes because of my skin color, you know, it comes through a different frame. Growing up a poor kid, at least by US standards, of a single mom that had a father that was in a mental institution, I am very sensitive to that set of concerns. And I would say that what we have in front of us is a framework to start from, not the framework that we necessarily need. And that's part of where I'd like to have your direct engagement on. I'm thinking of a metaphor. I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. It's a little silly. I don't know if you've ever heard of the metaphor. As it comes to breakfast, the chicken is involved and the pig is committed. I would like to make sure that you know that if you or anyone else at the Institute is open, I'm recruiting pigs. I appreciate chickens. And I appreciate chickens because we have on the SIG, we've had more than 33 people provide at least some lift through the different parts. And, you know, some of them are, you know, just the person on the street that is concerned, that has one of them's a marketing background, gifted in that area, and has been touched by mental health issues. We have other people like Dr. John Biello, who is, a successful researcher who's designed depression drugs, and who's involved. And so back to this chicken pig thing, what's that to say? I would love to have you guys involved in a way that has your strong thumbprint. Yes, I'm definitely a strong, opinionated, driven entrepreneurial leader. And we're looking at what started as my pet project. I mean, at Tech Ranch, before COVID hit, everyone kind of knew that Kevin had a pet project. His pet project, like we're doing stuff in robotic agriculture, and we're in 2019 we had formal bridges funded by the federal government of Mexico and the national government of Italy, and with Russia funded by the Eurasia Foundation. Right, that's our core business. But everyone knew that we had this little pet project of mental health stuff, and it wasn't until mid 2020 that it really became visible. That I'm like, hey, Wayne, this is something that the thing that I've been curious and playing around with as a hobby needs to now move forward as a real project. Get it out of the exploratory phase and start developing it into something that can be operationally powerful. And the truth is, we haven't had any funding for what we're doing. It's only because, like all these other projects that we do, that we can source, like example, the Hungarian government, the thing that's taking me to Hungary this next week, or on Saturday, I go to Hungary. A good example is that place as an example, not just to focus on Hungary, but that place as an example, as we already established, has got an amazing insight in mental health. And the core funding isn't for any mental health startups. The core funding is looking at IT startups and a few other areas. But if we actually have your thumbprint on this, bringing up the health inequity issues, we can also get to that. I'm just saying that there's a wide open space for participation, and I apologize if it comes across that there's something missing there, because I don't.
And again, I mean, this is one slide, right? So I think that was very helpful, and then I wasn't. Hopefully, it sound like it was missing. It just I didn't. When I think of resilient community tools, I just think that is going to be a critical component to that, right?
Yeah, no, that would be good to add. The one sub bullet you see about that is includes moral injury for care providers. I have a number of friends that are nurses. One of my close friends is a nurse that got into nursing that now is no longer a nurse, because she's like, hey, I'm fed up with what's happening with, we have people who are denying science and then in their final breaths in front of her, realizing their mistakes, and it wore her out. We actually have, so we have stuff like that, but I do think that there's a way of framing this. And at the end of this time, I'm going to add you to the Google Slides so we can actually have this. This is a living, we use Google Docs. The reason we do is so that they're living documents that you'll be able to put notes on directly. You can put comment notes on, and I encourage you to do that, with the idea that, maybe the slide itself, I run through this all the time, but you can put comments on it that then we can actually incorporate into the editing and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is hopeful or maybe I'm being, because I agree with you, right? Like we are at a crossroads, right? Where this is good, bad, or indifferent. We have an opportunity here like none other. So one thing COVID did bring was, I think, this opportunity for innovation, and everybody, right, regardless of stigma and regardless of what we historically have done, whether it's been investments or just, systems that are even available or kind of working in collaboration to provide services. Absent all of that, I do think everybody's looking for this solution. And I think you have a prime opportunity to come forward with something that's nicely wrapped, right? Because we need it. And it is not about putting more people into the workforce in the traditional way that we always have.
Well, and the thing that I can speak about that I really feel actually proud of, and one of the things that I want to make sure I surface so you see it, in the context of Austin becoming an entrepreneurial powerhouse of the world, right? I think Kaufman Institute at one point called it the most entrepreneurial city in the world. It used to not be that way. When I started my first company here, it was like, I wanted to be here because of the culture. I'd been in Silicon Valley because of my previous work. But I wanted to be here because of the culture, because this is a healthy culture, and Silicon Valley was a terrible culture. And I mean, it's really interesting what you can do out there, but it's not as healthy as Austin culture. And part of the way that we actually did this was, I recognized at the time, and I even wrote about it, that we need to actually take the Austin culture of entrepreneurship and actually the Austin culture and imbue the entrepreneurs. It was the musicians, the hippie musicians, that really informed guys like me about how to be an entrepreneur. And that's why I think Austin entrepreneurship, which is unique compared to Silicon Valley entrepreneurship, has such a punch to it. It has such a punch. There's something, punch is the wrong thing, because it's more like maybe a hug. So as we talk about that, about the seminal moment that we're in, about what might be possible with not just building a mental health, accelerator, but actually having it be, having this set of core things end up having the communal impact. And I'm not just talking about one organization. I mean, a lot of different organizations are going to, I think about it in the same way I think about, those times back in the year 2003, 2004, about, we had this fertile ground called Austin, Texas, that had this moment that it was stepping into, that we could do things with. In the same way, I see the vision, and it drives me a little bit crazy at times, that I see the vision about how to have like the March 15th event point to the launch of the accelerator, but really point to the messaging about a whole other way of thinking about what's possible. and having it have mental health recovery as well as economic recovery in a way that makes for a healthier America as well as healthier world. I think that, I will be that bold to actually say that. And, since I've been in 25 countries in the last year and a half, except for the year and a half of sitting at home during COVID, I think that there's enough reach that we already have without a lot of other funding, although we do need to go after funding to really stabilize what's happening, to make something interesting happen out of that. So let me go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I can only imagine how frustrating it is for you to wait for the rest of us to catch up to you.
Well, the crazy thing about it is, it's not necessarily, the hardest thing is, since I started this game with a bunch of demons, the bigger struggle from that. I'm impatient when it comes to the question that you just said, but I also have had my own fish to fry but actually the beautiful gift in that is, I think because of that experience, it's like in the martial arts, you kind of sometimes have to, in Aikido, the martial art I practice, you have to cook for a while to really get it. I started my martial art career in karate, which is, punch, 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 punch. I break the other person, and then, he doesn't get to walk away, I do, kind of thing. That's the mentality of the school that I was at. The Aikido school is, I'm going to take care of myself and also embrace and take care of this other person. It's a lot harder to do, and you really have to cook in it for a long time to really get there. You have to cook for a really long time. It took me forever to get my first, second, and third degree black belts. And there were a lot of injuries along the way. I think I was one of the more obstinate students. But that being said, I think I gained something, and that's the thing that has me develop, not necessarily patience, but we'll call it patience for what's happening right now. So I don't know. Just in going through, I'll go ahead and go through a couple other slides, and then we can hop into the actual events. The other slides, we've gone through the most important slides, but this is part of the group of people that are in the community. I've asked the community members to start putting their own names on this. Katja Walk is the woman that was the co-founder of the SIG. And there's a number of others that, like I said, at different points, there's been more than 33 different people from the community that have contributed at some interesting level, and their names should be on here. Obviously, we want to go even farther than that. And we're to the point that we need to, we have the theory of change. We now need the operational model that has funding in it to actually drive that beyond that. Whoops, for some reason it's going the wrong way. Let's see. Plans. Well, we've already talked about this. The main thing that I want to talk to you about is, it says 2020 versus 2021. I see that right now. Typically, as dyslexic, I probably didn't see it before, but Global Health Security Innovation Week 2020 was supposed to be this. It ended up that the overarching organization has pushed this a couple of different times. And we've actually looked at, but there's many more plans than just this. This is a dated slide. So the idea for the 2022 activities, especially the March 15th focus, convene the different parties of startup ventures, entrepreneurs, public health officials, investors, researchers around coming together to solve the mental health crisis, leveraging constituencies that have not been leveraged before, and creating partnerships that have not existed before. Perhaps a little bit redundant, but we're really trying to be very inclusive in this. And this is, again, where we're actually going for cultural change, not just driving ventures, but we use the ventures as our vanguard, as the tip of the spear, so to say, just like we did in Austin, Texas, to drive cultural change here as well. We have 4 different tracks that we've been looking at. These are in some flux, mainly because We definitely need more manpower. And since I'll be unabashed about saying, hey, Andy happened to mention your name, close to some leverage on this sort of stuff. And I just want to say, we've got a lot of good bones. We do need some more muscle. And so the idea is amplify knowledge and attract capital, just elevate things so that elevate it so that just like it makes more sense. This is happening, right? There's one of the companies that just got an investment of $90 million is catching some awareness. So it's this, the sparks are already started. The small fire has already started there. Leverage market forces. We think that there can be an even further impact on the that entrepreneurial ventures can do in a way that traditional healthcare just won't move as fast as us. And I'm talking about both inside and outside of the U.S. Like, I mean, and there's certain things that there's certain dynamics that, and one of the reasons that I started playing Tech Ranch on a world palette is because of this idea that sometimes the technology and the capability is going to advance someplace else much faster than it would here. And also sometimes there's already enough community support someplace else that, like one of my favorite stories is to say, like in the Zócalos, the town squares of Mexico, they solve things through the social space, not the marketplace. And we can learn from that too. There's a story to be told there that I have specific examples of. This drives into the reshaping our culture pillar. And the idea behind this pillar is, everyone recognizes, because they probably saw that show that says, hey, Facebook knows that they're destroying our country. And there's other tools that are destroying our country. So how do we actually help shift that as well? And there's a place there. And then boots on the ground. Looking at how can we expand the caretaking conversation. I don't necessarily think the ... is just deploying more mental health professionals. I'm all for that, but actually, I've worked with mental health professionals in my own walk, but I've also seen these other things that maybe be a little bit too crazy for some people. But the truth is, if there's a couple of these different tools that if I hadn't had them in my life, I probably wouldn't still be here, because I've been suicidal twice in my life. And, thankfully I found something that actually got me into a different path. And so I say that when we say boots on the ground, I want to make sure that we go beyond that. But this is kind of the idea. There's more details at that URL right there about the actual the actual event and stuff like that. Status of activities. I mentioned some of this that we have. I said 33, I guess it was 36 at this time. And we're in the process of looking for, external funding, not just to produce the March 15th thing. Right now on March 15th, we definitely need muscle more than anything else. But really to get to the venture pipeline and beyond. And there's some other, when I give you access to this, there's some other activities, or there's some other links and stuff like that are in here, as well as a few other ideas about, this is our you might think of the words theory of change, about how we actually, we start here with research and foundations, go to the venture world, then get this in the hands of the influencers being like the celebrities and stuff like that, right? Those are the cultural icons that drive things, that then drives action and advocacy, and make it a virtual cycle. This is at a very high level, our theory of change. I think I have we have a couple other slides. The next few are just just other thought moments about things to look at. Where we stand on the March 15th thing, the March 15th event, is we have a list of different people that we're interested in speaking. We have a number of different ventures and things like that. We do not yet have everything. I mean, we're having some difficulties getting butts and seats, and it's right now, since it's a volunteer team. I don't have like one of my employees dedicated to actually driving this, and just because The funding's not there. We're in the process of recovering from, rebuilding after COVID ourselves, after the COVID economy ourselves. And so I can't just say, hey, TEXGHS, we're just gonna. So we've been doing this through volunteers, and that's been effective in certain ways and it hasn't been. And so from a standpoint of if I was to be bold to ask for really, some muscle just to help pull those pieces together, the key thing that I'm missing, that if this was a normal TEXGHS project I would have, is I'd have a coordinator that all that he or she does is coordinate information from the volunteers. Like the volunteers, we already have a long list of, I'll give you kind of a sense. Let's see if I have the spreadsheet up here. Do not have it right here. I thought I did, but I don't. I'll just go over this just so you see it real quick. We have this is called an air table. An air table is a way of taking and like when you have a lot of data, like as an example, here's our list of speakers. And I think we just moved over to this from a Google Sheet being a Google spreadsheet. And we're trying to make it easier just to go to track all the different information. I'll show you the original, and we can go into details at some other point or during this time. But on the details, we have the original spreadsheet that has the actual, what will look more like the true breakdown of what you would imagine. Here's our original list of speakers, all the different areas, startups and other people with insight. We started working on a series of panels. And now the difficulty and the reason we switched over to Airtable, just so you know, and this is me being a little bit of a technology geek, but the spreadsheet was so daunting for, one or two people to engage with. There was no simple way of pick up a small piece of the spreadsheet and move it down the path, kind of like you do. You know what a Kanban is? You know how you can a Kanban. It's a fancy Japanese word for how do you track the progress of something. Certainly, there's been a project in the past you've been a part of that you have a wall that you just have sticky notes on, and it's like everything starts over here and then it moves to the right, and it's like, okay, this is the idea, now it's coming together, blah blah blah. Part of the thing that was a problem with the spreadsheet was and I'll take us off of that just because I'll try to explain it this way. Part of the problem with the spreadsheet, given that we have this group of volunteers, is as some of my people are looking at it, since I don't have the project coordinator position that owns the overall spreadsheet, it's been daunting, and it's been hard for the team or the committee to actually be able to take, because there's not some simple way. So we moved over to Airtable in the last over the last few days, because I recognize that with Airtable, you can actually say, okay, don't worry about the whole thing. Just move this one little card, like imagine back to the wall of sticky notes. Just don't worry about everything. Just worry about this one sticky note, right? And carry the sticky note through. My concern is part of my work, especially since I've been working with communities, and especially as we're rebuilding Tech Ranch, and learning how to do it in a different way than just throwing bodies at it in the past, is how to build a production system, that a bigger group of people can be involved. When we start talking about transformation for the long term, I'll take a little bit of a side note about this. One of the things that I know a lot about, and I studied extensively, is open source software. Are you familiar with open source software? Well, so you've heard about, there's the iPhone and there's Android. iPhone was developed by Apple, and he kind of, was pulled together around Apple. But Android was pulled together with literally tens of thousands of different people have pieces that they brought to it. What's happened is there was a commons that was built in like a commons is a word that comes from, way back in England, where, you have cattle, I have cattle, someone else has cattle, and we only have this little bit of land to feed them on. How is it that we can actually effectively use it together? That's a commons. The way that Tech Ranch was able to have a transformational impact on entrepreneurship here in Austin, and now we're extending it to other parts of the world, is we built what I called an attention commons. Like Like, if you can find the right person that knows the answer, and 5 minutes of their time is available at the right time in the history of your startup, it can be worth tens of thousands of dollars. But if it's only going to take them 5 minutes, they don't have to charge you tens of thousands of dollars. They just, they'll do their little part to help out the community. Again, using the social space versus the marketplace to drive capability. That I have a theory. I haven't published that either. I wrote 200 pages on it years ago, and I got disgusted with myself and said, I got to go build more of this. Otherwise, people won't believe my theory. I just never publish on the paper, or on the, not paper, but book, whatever. But I can show the effect of what we've done. The idea back to this is, in building a production system, part of what we're doing, and we've gotten far, but we haven't gotten it as far, because I really do need a project coordinator as soon as possible, whether it's on my team or on y'all's team or whoever. This is the one gaping hole more than anything else, is just the person who can kind of manage the commons, manage the production system.
Sure.
That is just like saying, and that way, individual community members can grab that one card and they can move it forward without being daunted. I mean, I have 2 committee members, actually 3 of them, that are just so committed. 2 of those 3 those committee members have lost family members to suicide, and I know that they're killing themselves to be a part of this, because they're that's the wrong metaphor, sorry. They're committed beyond convenience.
So I'm not trying to be obtuse, right? So let me just, in my own little kind of small-minded way. So is it kind of like what you're asking for is from a project coordinator perspective, is you have, this list of steering committee members who are, committed, but when they open up that spreadsheet, they're like, whoa, where do I start? The coordinator's pulling out, here's your task. I'm managing you to do your task for today, and manage them through the process, so that piece, right? You have one person who's looking at the master plan, but you're helping that person navigate them through this.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and I can even show you on this piece of software that I have. Like, I if you'd like to see it, I'll show you how it's not completely filled out yet, because, like I said, I recognized that the production system we had was not working. And because I come from a technology background, I'm like, okay, I can at least make the commons that we're building together. I can at least make it easier for, if an individual only has a micro amount of time to move a card from one place to the next place, I want to engage that. And actually, I had someone yesterday that called me up frantic about it. I'm like, hey, it's okay. We have, we all have to live first and all that stuff. And I'm sorry, I hadn't. The truth is that a few months ago, I really wish that I'd actually gone ahead and just aggressively started soliciting for funds, because of the, we have a 501c3 that parts of this could go through as well. It's just I'm a high tech guy, a startup guy, and I'm always like, okay, which has got a good part and a bad part to it. I didn't judge things as quickly as I thought, and we had some stumbling blocks as Delta came back to the States. We ramped back up our business initially at the beginning of 2021, and then we got hit. And that created a loss of my attention on this project, as much as I'd like to have personally be able to do that. That's where having gotten a project coordinator in a little bit earlier would have been great. I'll show you exactly how this happens, or how this could work. All right, so we have a set of activities as an example. One of the things that could be like, and this is just an example, like very high level. Therapy is a startup pitch. This is a startup pitch. Therapy is the company that I've been referring to that's out of Poland. The speaker is this guy, Luke, that I met when I was in Latvia, as an example. And you can notice that this is a link to the speakers area. This is a little bit different than your normal type of spreadsheet if you haven't seen Airtable, because it's really cool that you can enforce things in a certain way. And I mean, actually for this view right now, that's all it's there. But I can actually say, this is the Kanban, the place where we can see that the only thing that's been confirmed is the introduction to Mental Health SIG, which is the first thing that happens on the first day. And the guy who's speaking is Kevin Coyne, as an example, right? Don't be, I don't know your technology background, but I want you not to be overwhelmed by this, if at all possible.
Assume I'm low tech.
Yeah. Well, the main thing is just think of it. Think of this area right here is just one, for today's purposes, think of it as just one Post-it note, nothing more. And then ignore everything else right now. Let's not get into specifics on it. On the speakers, as an example, we talked about Dr. Octavio Martinez. Now he's listed twice. This is because we just did this information here fairly quick. You know, here's his title, here's his organization, here's his email address. The person that referred him in is Kevin Coyne. This could be, you know, Kevin or Don or Tammy. And then the idea is to have him do a keynote. Now, if we decided that we wanted them to be a panel instead, we turn it to panel and we're done.
And does it change panel? Does his name move to the panel?
Yeah, if we were to go over here and look at, well, I don't have it all the way set up where it's just really easy to see. Like this is the, I have it. The answer is yes. It just needs a tiny bit more polish for the specific thing. The thing that I actually did though is I set it up so, you know, who are the people that actually are showing up? Like, you know, here's Andy as an example. And I told my my assistant to get from Kevin's email. He hasn't gotten to tear into this yet, as an example. But and these are all the people that Kevin's in charge of. These are all the ones that were John. These are all the ones for Tammy. These are all the ones that haven't been listed yet. We only have a handful of people at this point in this spreadsheet, because I just got this. I mean, quite literally, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to be an engineer to solve this problem, because I have community members that are, because we don't have the project manager or the project coordinator. The thing we've been doing is not working. It's working, but it's stripping the transmission. It's really being rough on people. And so that's why I'm like, we can do a technology intervention, but you can kind of, the main thing I want you to see about this is that you can actually see different ways of getting involved. And then we have a third party thing here. If someone wanted to share, if someone wanted to add speakers, but didn't want to know anything about this, here's just a form. Like you could actually,
I mean, add speakers, but didn't want to know anything about this.
well, like as an example, say, I think you guys have 90 people at the organization, right?
Almost 100.
Yeah. So if you wanted to send out a message to say, hey, I would love to get your ideas for people that should speak at this conference. The way that I could actually make sure that I don't impact your time, but you send one email that goes to 100 people, I just send this link and they can say, hey, instead of emailing them all back to me, just put them here.
Got it. Got it.
And all I'm trying to say is there's different ways of interacting with the way that I'm setting up the system. And I'm trying to set it up the system so that if we want to leverage, imagine in the future, we want to leverage thousands of people. Imagine in the future, like think about it. How do you leverage thousands of people, especially when they only have, hey, I've got 5 minutes that I can contribute, but I'm only going to contribute 5 minutes. If you think about it from that standpoint, then what you say is, you know, if I sent an email out to a bunch of different people and I wanted to collect a bunch of different answers, I could use this sort of stuff and then work them through using that sticky notes, like we talked about earlier. That's all.
When did Andy talk to you about Dr. Vikram Patel? Did he talk about our work, our Lone Star Depression Challenge, the Empower initiative?
he mentioned a couple different projects, but he didn't give me necessarily, I didn't have a handle that I could go pull on to follow up. I mean, or everything I did, I've actually already read. So I'm not familiar by that by name.
So I won't go into detail, right? But I just want to know, make sure I'm on the right page, right? This is really more of a valid mental validation for me to make sure I'm, up to speed and catching up with you. So let's say, so we have Empower, it's part of our whole initiative, and it's community health workers. But the piece that I think is unique and innovative to it is that it's training lay persons, right, who are non-clinical and they're just lay people, they're not social workers, they're not clinicians, but training them on behavioral activation, right? It's an actually evidence-based tool that was perfected over 10 years in India. The beauty of it, though, as part of that, is that they're using a technology platform. So Damagi is their technology platform. And so that has been valuable in a couple of ways, right? It allows for this virtual training, virtual peer learning, virtual supervision, but it also allows for the scale that we're talking about, right? And the rigor and the evaluation component that a lot of community health workers don't have. They're trained one and done and you're done, right? There's not a lot of validity to, and don't get me wrong, I've worked with community health workers for
No, I get what you're saying. Everyone can learn faster if they have a scaffold, right? If you have a scaffold and you have a net, you can learn much faster. And I'm interpreting your words through that. So yeah, no judgment.
So what I'm thinking is, like someone like Vikram Patel, right? Like he clearly, it's not just about the community health workers, but it's about using an innovative tool, right? That probably went through the same incubation period, right? To illustrate in practice how this works. And so does that make sense at all?
It does. Yeah, perfect sense.
So like, I was just thinking, like sending that out to Vikram and say, hey, look, I don't need you to spend a whole lot of time. Just send this out to your networks, or I'm sending it to you. Give me some suggestions and we'll follow up, right? Like here's what this session is about. Here's a color or a feel for this. Who do you think in your portfolio of,
Yeah, well, and so totally. And the main thing about it is like, let's have two different levels of conversation real quick. One of them is about March 15th and just scrambling because that's coming very soon. And then the next one is stepping back and thinking about this transformational place we're talking about in the future. There's an answer here that, maybe we only want to have 50 people inputting stuff total right now because we only have a certain amount of time. But then using the same type of thinking, there's an answer when we get here where we can actually do things at scale that we don't want to try to do for March 15th, but but the style of thinking that you're thinking about, creating the scaffold and the net, and like the application enables people to you called it behavioral activation, to do behavioral activation. It's like the dance steps, right? Put your foot here, put your foot here, put your foot here. Now we're doing the salsa, right? It's like that style thing. There's an equivalent style of thinking about that as I think as a Aikido 3rd degree black belt, right? About how do you impart knowledge, to the white belt who's stepping onto the mat, that if they're not careful, if I'm not careful and I have the responsibility as the black belt to that white belt, I have a responsibility to see that they can be successful and they don't break an arm in that, first 6 months. It's actually a really dangerous place unless I do my job, right? And what I'm hearing that you're saying as well is this individual and this organization has built a structure that imparts that. I think that that's brilliant. And that type of thing is the same spirit that I'm trying to offer up, that I'm like, I should have just done this months ago to build a system that supports even this group of volunteers. So this group of volunteers or this group of behavioral workers, like you're suggesting with the behavioral activation tool. Yeah. And by the way, the reason I'm even taking a little bit of a side note about that is that's the secret, I think, to how we impart transformational impact in the long term. Is we have to think about that decentralized, but successful dance steps to get to the salsa kind of style of thinking.
Well, like when I think about the transformation, one of the things I think that has made Meadows so successful, right? And I mean, I just say that, but having worked on outside of Meadows, but with Meadows and now being on the inside, they did an assessment, a community assessment. It's really like a systems approach. And what made that so successful is they literally took recommendations, and it wasn't, here's your recommendations and go figure this out. It's strategically working in a parallel effort to say, how do these recommendations get plugged into what? And I feel like with what you're talking about, yes, you have this incubator and you have these variety, right? But I think it's also thinking up here to say, okay, I know where they're going to land. Like I'm thinking at the same time, I'm building that capacity, right? They're going to be available. We've got to be thinking from a transformation perspective, where is it they're going to land, whether, and I'm not just talking in Texas, but globally, right?
Yeah, globally, yeah. Well, yeah, with the brilliant part of that too is in even in your example, you're pointing to this, right? This this solution, this provocation, we'll call it a provocation as well as a solution, came out of India.
Mhm.
And how brilliant is that, right? Same thing about, getting to go to Hungary and, Csikszentmihalyi, I can never say his name, but the guy who invented flow, that wrote the book on flow, he's Hungarian. The woman who discovered the first mRNA vaccine, or came up with the first theory about that, she's Hungarian. One of our top world experts on trauma, Dr. Gabor Mate, he's Hungarian. And I'm like, okay. So, I mean, and I'm picking on Hungary because I'm about to get to go there, and I'm excited about it because it's one of the reasons that we're partnering with the Hungarian government to do this type of work. But inherent in that idea is to get back to what you were pointing at the very beginning, the heterogeneity of the solution set. If you want to solve really complex problems, you have to have a very heterogeneous solution set. And that is part of the theory of change that TEXGHS has been operating from. Doing international work, I never thought of as international work, but the first 1,000 entrepreneurs to go through one of our programs, even though I was based originally in Austin, we're actually in Chile. That experience in 2003 forced me to think in a way that I'm like, you can't do what you do with entrepreneurs in Austin in Chile. And it was a cultural crisis, and there was a cultural shock and all sorts of other stuff that I got to go through. But in that crisis, a different theory of how to do this came out. So back to what you're saying is the heterogeneity, like the Indian example, is brilliant because it points exactly to what I'm talking about. Sometimes when I get onto my high horse, in fact, tomorrow we're going to have a program at 11 o'clock Texas time that's called Reforming Healthcare. It's part of our Venture Outfitter Weekly series where we have this, it's essentially an hour program that I lead, although there's experts that we bring in that talk through it. And we have a bunch of entrepreneurs that are interacting with those experts as part of the process. That's partially what I've said is like healthcare in the United States is not going to get necessarily solved here. It's going to get solved someplace else. So your Indian example, I really love to have you send me the URL to that, because I'm going to use it as an example. It's like there's a really excellent one that's coming out of Denmark called Howdy. It's funny as a Texan to hear a Danish guy say howdy. They have a platform that's helping intervene in mental health issues. And then they've shown, they've actually done the analytics, like rigorous analytics around it, that they're able to intercept and attenuate a mental health crisis within 1/4 the time that it normally would happen. And whether their go-to-market is to engage the corporations to have this service available. And then they do, like you're saying, I don't know I don't specifically know the words behavioral activation, but they're doing kind of a similar type of construct about how to have people that are trained, but not necessarily normally mental health trained professionals to help engage at the right time, so that the people that are running the company can find out what's happening. And,
Right.
are we taking care of people or not? And again, it's because of that Danish background that I think that they got there faster than might normally happen in someplace else.
I would be so interested to see how their go-to-market strategy plays out, because right now, more than ever, you have corporations that are struggling with how to address this issue, right? You know, I was on Bank of America, literally like one of the big HR poobahs for all of Bank of America was saying, I'm not worried about the person who has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. I'm worried about the mom that's coming in, sitting in front of her computer, and she's not there. She's not thinking, right?
Yeah.
She productivity, right? And it wasn't about a bottom line productivity. It was like, she's worried about the fact that the school might call and say that they're in, COVID, 101 again. And, you've got to go back home and you've got to balance being a mother and working and children. And she's like, that's the person who's on the break.
Yeah.
And so like, it's interesting, like these sorts of innovations, right? I think there's this hungry appetite right now for, especially in corporate America, where you couldn't have gotten them to even focus on mental health years ago.
I know that's the great thing about 40 million people saying, they're voting with their feet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I hate that there's so much crisis in that.
I know.
But that being said, I mean, as we get through it, people like you and me, we can help people get through it and actually come out ahead, right? I mean, I hate to see it, from my standpoint, I got to see this as a child, right? And I think one of the reasons that I'm so sensitive to actually wanting to help others walk between these worlds and, guide them into a healthier place is because, yeah, my trauma came early and it came hard. and that's the part that sucks, but the part that's possible is that I do think we can, the appetite's there. 40 million people saying, hey, take this job, and you know what? That's the crisis, but the good news is that we can actually fix things out of it. So what's the let me do this. I'm still recording. I'm going to stop the recording, and because I want to ask you some other stuff about the actual organization. Let me just stop that.